Yes. Well,
Yes.
like Annabeth, I spent a lot of time in my childhood at the local library. In a small town with a population of about 800 people, this wasn't the town library. It was actually run by a high school English teacher who would later be my teacher and her husband. What I didn't know at the time was they were buying the books, most of the books that they had there for all of us kids to borrow. And at one point, I know they were buying large amounts of Nancy Drew books just to keep up with my voracious reading. So I had gone through all of those and decided that when I grew up, I was going to be a writer. But by the time I left college with two English degrees, I realized I didn't have any experience to write about anything. So I decided to go join the Army for a few years and see what I could learn there. Well, 36 years later, it was time for me to finally leave. And then I returned to writing. And I started to write fiction, but I realized very quickly that my writing style was not right for that. And so I wrote some nonfiction. Now, where this book came from was actually because I began to collect obituaries. I know how that sounds, but I had read some fascinating stories of World War II women veterans who were passing away. And this was in 2017. I was asked to speak at an event on leadership, and I used a couple of the stories that I had saved. I'd saved these stories because I thought someday I'm going to be able to tell these stories in a way that I hope engages people and brings them in. So I was still gathering them when in 2019, I'm watching the Emmy Awards, and Alex Borstein received the Emmy for Best Supporting Actress for Mrs. Maisel, if you all watch that. And her speech just hit me with that electricity that said, this is it. And what she said was, in World War II, my grandmother was about to be shot into a pit. And she turned to the guard and said, what happens if I step out of line? And he said, well, I don't have the heart to shoot you, but somebody will. So she stepped out of line. And for that, I am here today. And for that, my children are here today. So step out of line, ladies. Step out of line. So this book is a collection of, it's not the obituaries, it's their stories of these amazing people who did different things during that most incredible time in history. Many books you read, I think, about what groups did in World War II talk about those who had the same kind of jobs, whether they were all pilots or they were spies. But it's not the job that matters, it's the experience. It's the ability to take a risk, not knowing what the future holds. And so there is that theme in this, but it's also a theme about community, about learning how many people you're connected to and how they help you and support you. And I think there are other themes in here as well about the impact from what they have had on more generations. I'd like to tell you about just one of them. I want to tell you about Alice. Alice Marble was a tennis champion in the 1930s. Anybody ever hear of her? I hadn't. I didn't know anything about Alice. She won 16 Grand Slams in a period of 6 years. Now, Serena Williams has won 23, I think, at least, and she's played much longer. So Alice was quite a prodigy for her winnings. And when she reached the period of time when it's about 1940, she said, you know, I'm not making any money. As an amateur, then you really couldn't. So I'm going to retire and go pro. Well, that was not very good timing because right after Pearl Harbor, there were no more tennis exhibitions. There were no more tours. So she began to help out with entertaining the troops. She wasn't able to go and serve because she'd had TB when she was younger. So she did tennis exhibitions for soldiers. She traveled. She met and married an Army pilot. Then she had a terrible accident and lost the baby they were about to have. Then he died in a plane crash. About this time, when she is feeling terrifically depressed, she's approached by the Army and asked to be a spy. A tennis champion be a spy. So she goes to Switzerland, where she meets up with an old boyfriend who just happens to be money laundering for the Nazis. She's at his house. She breaks into his safe. She steals all of the information and is driving away when she's caught by a Russian spy and someone who was supposed to have been her handler. But he's also a traitor. She wakes up in the hospital after having been shot, and her boss is there to say, well, I'm sorry, they took the camera. There's no evidence. And she said, you forget I have a photographic memory. So much of what she found was used in the Nuremberg trials. And the whole time I'm reading this, I'm going, I didn't know that. Why don't I know that? I should know these stories. I should know the impact that these people have had, because I don't think our history is complete until we have all of the stories that make up that time. And I should mention, by the way, because she certainly was one, that one of the other things she did during this time in New York was become a senior editor for Marvel Comics, what then became Marvel Comics later. And yes, she helped create Wonder Woman. Who knew? And after the war, she played another role in that she helped desegregate professional women's tennis and all tennis. She took on the tennis establishment, called them out as hypocrites, and made a huge impact with what she did then. Now, her story and many of these others are connected in certain ways. People either knew of each other or they were in the same places or at the same times. And I just found it incredible to see the ways in which they influenced not just each other, but the next generations. So I'm really excited to share this with you, and I hope you get to read it too.